Guten Tag, it's your boy, Coach Mark, and today what we're going to do is talk about visualizations. And the reason why we're going to talk about visualizations is what I tend to see are, obviously, you have great intentions. Then the day happens, and something doesn't go quite to plan, and it just kind of gets off the rails, and it, like, by the end of the day you're like, my day got lost. Kind of corollary to that, most self-help groups recommend visualizations. I know I've always recommended visualizations. I know many of my self-help books and courses and stuff that I've taken have all recommended. However, the difference between how I recommend it and what I typically see is there's a major difference that I'd like to clear up. So hopefully this is helpful for you. So visualizations, what you think it is versus what it should be like. Okay. Now, first off, what I want to go through first is the St. Farr model. Now, this is stuff obviously we do in our program, but the St. Farr model stands for stimulus, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. So if you're not getting the results that you want, then obviously you need to take different actions. But a lot of the times when you're taking different actions, what's also going on is you feel you're sabotaging yourself, stuff doesn't happen, so just changing your actions isn't enough. What actually happens is that how you feel is the impetus to taking new action, and your thoughts create those feelings. So for instance, if you're scared, then you're gonna run, you're gonna fight, or you're gonna freeze up, right? But the thought that you have before you're scared is, something like if a bear's chasing you, you're gonna be like, oh my god, I'm gonna die, right? Which makes you feel scared, which makes you create some, right? So, or maybe what happens is an email comes in from your boss about, we need to talk. Obviously, you don't see what the body is of the email, and the first thought you have is, oh my god, I'm in trouble, which creates this anxiety, right? And then the action is you freeze up and you don't do anything, or you just worry about it some more, and then the result is obviously you're just kind of locked into the day. You've kind of lost the day. So what I want you to understand is, if you have different thoughts about stuff that goes on during the day, it will generate different feelings, which will create different actions. Okay? Now, visualizing a future event is recommended, right? This is a really good thing. And you hear about this in sports first, then you hear about it in business. And obviously, I think as a kid, we all daydreamed about sinking the game-winning shot in basketball, hitting the walk-off grand slam at the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs to, win the World Series, right? We've all daydreamed. That's a form of visualization. The good stuff is always there. We always daydream about it. We always daydream about beating up the bully, or pulling in a ton of money, or landing this huge deal, or whatever. That's great. That's typically what's recommended, and that's very, very good. But here's where I want to share the difference. In reality, even though we may be, let's take this grand slam example, because that's what I grew up with. So batter gets up to the batter's box, full bases, or bases loaded, 2 outs, World Series on the line. Either you lose or you hit this grand slam, right? Everyone's counting on you, the pressure. In reality, that's like the best case scenario. That is absolutely the best case scenario. But there's also a lot of other things that could happen, right? You could get walked. You could get a single. You could get a double. You could get a triple. You could get hit by the ball. You could get struck out. You could ground out, right? So all of a sudden now, here are 7 other options. And then you could get up to the plate, and then you could get swapped out, right? There could be a rain delay. There could be, there's just so many options. And there can also be like crazy options that are completely out of your control, like a rain delay or a brain aneurysm. I just put that little example there just for dramatic's sake. Some of these things that happen are not up to you. Some of these are up to you. But these are all options. And the Stoics have a phrase for there. It's called Memento Mori, but just it means remember that you're mortal, right? Or remember that you're going to die. And the idea is you may be visualizing this perfect case scenario, but also if you remember a meteor could hit the ground and you'll die, then if you're okay with that, if you're like, okay, listen, I did everything that was in my power and I'm fine with that, and if a meteor hits the ground, like that's fine too. If you kind of can rationalize, get your head wrapped around, come to terms with this could happen, then all of a sudden you are in a much better mind space. You're going to have better thoughts about what's going on. That puts everything into a better perspective, and then you can actually take action on it. So what I recommend is you've got to think of this spectrum of options that are going to happen, and everything in between, every kind of perturbation of what's going to happen. So, and then when you're thinking of these things and when you're practicing for these things, nothing can shake you in that moment, right? So for most people, what happens is they get these first two things. What am I doing today? And what do I want to have happen? They're very, very good at this. But the other two questions you need to ask are, what could go wrong? And if that went wrong, how can I live with the downside? Sorry, this little arrow's in the way. So the questions are, what am I doing today? What's the upside? What's the downside? Can I live with the downside? And then obviously, and obviously if you kind of circle back around, can I be more prepared for all of these situations? Now this is a problem-solving progression for anything. This could be an investment, right? Hey, listen, I'm going to drop $1,000 on GameStop. This is a very relevant, time-relevant reference. But let's just say, let's take that back. Yeah, you invest your money in some stock, right? We always think of the upside, but what happens if you lose that money, right? Can you live with the downside? It's not, hey, listen, I'm going to invest $1,000 into the stock. What's the upside? Well, I can make $10,000. What's the downside? Well, I could lose the $1,000, right? Now you ask, can I live with that $1,000? Have I already essentially steeled myself for that possibility? And I think for a lot of people who are investing, when they kind of separate themselves from the outcome, then all of a sudden now they can kind of make better decisions objectively versus emotionally, right? And if you can't live with that downside, then can you adjust or prepare better? So what's a good example? Obviously, we're talking food and health. So for most people at the beginning of the day, they're like, all right, today is going to be pretty good. I'm going to pack my lunch. I'm going to bring this all into the office. And then what's the best case scenario? Obviously, 10:30, I have my snack. 1 o'clock, I have my lunch. 4:30, I have my snack, and then I go home, right? I do my work, I eat my food, I go home, and that's it. But obviously, what could happen? Whether it's in your control or out of your control. For most people, obviously, something could happen. You could just forget all of your food at your house. Staff could bring snacks and drinks to the office, right? Someone felt really nice and they decided to bring some donuts in. You can get extra hungry and then to say, you know what, when I get extra hungry, normally I go and buy candy from the vending machine, or I go to Get-Go and grab an extra this or that. Sometimes in this get drinks after work, sometimes at the end of the day, me and my friends want to go out and have a happy hour, right? And I told myself I'm just going to have a beer. And then a beer in, I'm like, man, I'm having a lot of fun. Maybe I'll have 2, maybe I'll have 3. Or maybe I was going to go there and just have a Diet Coke, and I ended up having a couple of drinks and all that. Now, can I live with the downside? So at this point, you're now visualizing, okay, well, what happens if that is what happens today? All right, there's a difference between shame versus guilt. So first off, you got to figure out the shame is about your character and who you are, right? Is this who I am? Versus, is this what I did? And that's guilt. That's the shame is feeling bad about who you are, and then the guilt is feeling bad for what you did. So how are you looking at this mistake, right? Are you ashamed of yourself? Or you feel a little guilty because you said you did one thing and you were going to do another thing? How easy is it to recover? Okay, listen, if I have one beer, or if I plan to have one beer and I have 2 beers instead, how easy is it to recover? Turns out, it's pretty easy to recover, depending on who you are. For some people, it's not. For some people, it's super easy. These are questions you have to ask yourself. Right? If I'm measuring my weight gain and I gained a bunch of weight, well, let me think about it. The downside is I gained a lot of weight, but is that water weight? Is that fat weight? Right? What kind of expectations did I have for this situation? Expectations carry an implied or else. Hey, listen, I'm going to have 1 beer this afternoon or else. Right? That's what I expect out of myself. And if you had 2 beers, what's the consequence of that? So when you start as you start to visualize all the possibilities that are going to go on, and this is going to happen multiple times throughout the day until you get really good at kind of understanding, all right, here are the spectrum of things that are going to happen. You start thinking of, oh, okay, well, if somebody brings in snacks to my office, what is going to be my default action that sets me up for the most success? So, for instance, when I had an engineering job, I would always bring in my lunch because I knew everybody wanted to go out for lunch, but I just overate all the time. So I was like, I'm just going to bring my lunch. It's going to be fine. I'm going to have some time to myself, maybe take a nap in my car for 15 minutes or whatever. But if someone brings food to the office, well, that's going to happen so frequently that after a while, I just had this like standard operating procedure, right? This protocol that I would follow when someone would happen. Donuts, I had a protocol. Sandwiches, I had a protocol. Cookies, I had a protocol. And I would just go through like, all right, what's the worst case scenario in terms of donuts? Like, well, kind of worst case scenario is I literally eat all of them, before anybody else in the office can have any. And that wasn't actually going to happen because what I would do is say like, all right, if you have a donut, first off, it's not a big deal because you can fit it into your plan. It's only so many calories if you're counting calories, or it's just not a big deal. But I also had a protocol like you can have a donut, but you can only have one before you give yourself a period of time before you're giving yourself an opportunity to have a second one. So it's like I can have one, and then I need to wait 40 minutes before I have the second one. Just give it enough time. Like, do I really, really want it? Do I feel obligated to have it? So I had this protocol. Same thing with sandwiches. So sandwiches would come in, and they would be from DeBella's Subs with this huge, huge piece of bread that it was on. So I was like, okay, if I want to have lunch, I'd switch out some things. I would like cut I would take half the bread off. I just had this protocol. And then all of a sudden, if someone brought in food, and I'm like, do I really want this sandwich? Yeah, I'm just going to go grab a free sandwich. I had this whole protocol, and I knew I was in because I'd visualized how am I going to act in this situation. And the worst case scenario is going to be X, and I could plan for it and blah, blah, blah. I also understood that in certain situations, as a guy who was trying to keep myself fit, when I'm standing around cookies and I'm not grabbing cookies, people were going to act a certain way around me. Okay, and this took me a while because I realized what was happening was, oh, Mark is fitter than me, and he's not eating cookies. And they would say something to essentially kind of bring me down pegs closer to them. And then at the same time, if I did have some cookies or donuts or whatever in front of this person who is overweight, what they're seeing is they're seeing this fit guy essentially giving permission for people to eat cookies at will. And so I also had a protocol around that. I understood that here's this person who's like, all right, he's skinny, eating cookies. I want that, so I can eat cookies. And so I understood that I may be sending some mixed messages. So I'll just say, yeah, I'm going to have a donut, and then pretty much like, that's going to be great. Maybe I'll save one for tomorrow or something like that. And kind of understand that I had set some boundaries for myself so that I'm communicating to others very, very clear intentions and kind of what's on my mind so that they're not feeling bad, right? They're not feeling weird around it, because people definitely imprint what they think on you. So that's another thing too. You can also visualize what other people are going to say to you in certain situations and how you're going to handle it. And when you understand that people typically project their own insecurities on others in situations that kind of trigger them or create a stimulus or stress, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, it's not about me. So if you're having a really, really rough day, or you had a really, really rough day, what I recommend doing is visualizing the night before, the morning of, quiet moment, right before something happens. Visualize the spectrum of things that could happen. What could go well? What could go bad? And if the bad stuff happens, am I willing to live with the bad stuff? And if I'm not willing to handle this, how do I prepare better? So, in terms of visualization, this is an important exercise. I recommend that you do this every single morning for a period of time to kind of get into the groove. I'm going to make another video about a mind dump, right, as part of this visualization process, where you can really get your brain out of an anxious state into a creative state. That's going to be a different video. In the meantime, I think that's it in terms of this video. Yeah. So in the morning, midday, whatever it is, the night before, I recommend that, hey, listen, tomorrow I'm going to get into the situation where everything's not going to go to plan. Let me visualize what's going to happen and how I'm going to act, and go through the worst case scenarios and how am I going to be in that situation. Am I going to be okay with it? What are my thoughts? How am I going to react, so that you can start acting more in accordance with what you want to have happen. Hopefully this was helpful. This is an 18-minute video. Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end.